The chains bit into Diana Valewood's wrists like iron teeth, cold metal grinding against the raw skin where she had twisted and pulled through 3 days of imprisonment. She knelt on the stone floor of the great hall, her knees aching against the unforgiving granite, her head bowed not in submission, but in the desperate attempt to hide the terror that surely blazed across her face. The pack council sat in their carved wooden chairs above her, 12 wolves who had once nodded respectfully when she passed them in the healing halls, who had once brought their sick children to her gentle hands. Now they stared down at her, with disgust carved into every line of their weathered faces. Diana Valewood, Elder Torvin intoned, his voice echoing through the hall like a death knell. You stand accused of poisoning the sacred pregnancy tonic prepared for Luna Sarah, causing the loss of her 3 unborn pups and nearly claiming her life. How do you plead? The words struck Diana like physical blows, each syllable another bruise on her already battered soul. She had not poisoned anything. She had spent 6 years training under her brother Griffin, learning every herb and compound, memorizing the delicate balance of healing and harm that existed in nature's pharmacy. She had mixed that tonic herself with trembling, reverent hands, knowing how desperately the Luna had wanted these children. How many years of heartbreak had preceded this precious pregnancy with 3 pups? Not guilty, Diana whispered, then forced strength into her voice. I am not guilty. I would never harm Luna Sarah or any— Silence. Griffin's voice cut through her protest like a blade, and Diana's heart cracked along fault lines she hadn't known existed. Her brother stood at the right hand of Alpha Thornwood, dressed in his finest healer's robes, his face arranged in an expression of pained righteousness that Diana now recognized as a carefully crafted mask. The evidence is clear. I examined the tonic myself after the Luna's collapse. I found traces of moonsbane hidden beneath the surface herbs, a poison only a trained healer would know how to disguise so effectively. Diana lifted her head despite the guard's warning growl, staring at the brother she had worshipped since childhood. Griffin, who had taught her to identify her first healing herb at age 7. Griffin, who had held her through their mother's death and their father's abandonment. Griffin, who had smiled with such pride when she successfully delivered her first healthy pup into the world. Griffin, who now met her gaze with nothing but cold satisfaction gleaming in eyes the same deep brown as her own. Griffin, she breathed, her voice cracking on his name. Griffin, please. You know I didn't do this. You trained me. You know I would never— I know what I saw, he interrupted, and something in his voice, something triumphant, something cruel, finally made Diana understand. Her healing gifts had been growing stronger than his. She had started receiving requests that should have gone to the lead healer. Last month, Alpha Thornwood himself had asked Diana to examine his aging mother instead of Griffin. He had done this. Her own brother had poisoned Luna Sarah and blamed Diana to destroy her. The realization crashed through her like a winter avalanche, stealing her breath and freezing her blood. She opened her mouth to scream the truth, to reveal what she now saw so clearly written in Griffin's smug expression, but Alpha Thornwood raised his hand for silence, and her voice died in her throat. The council has reviewed the evidence presented by our lead healer, Alpha Thornwood announced, his deep voice brooking no argument. Diana Valewood, we find you guilty of attempted murder and treason against your Luna. The sentence is death by silver burning at tomorrow's dawn. The world tilted sideways. Diana felt the ground dropping away beneath her knees, felt reality fragmenting into sharp-edged pieces that sliced through every hope she had ever harbored. Silver burning, the most agonizing death a wolf could suffer, reserved for the worst traitors, designed to make the condemned scream until their vocal cords shredded and their bodies finally surrendered to the poison eating them alive. She was going to die screaming for a crime she didn't commit, while her brother watched with satisfaction. But even as despair threatened to drag her under, Diana's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a gesture so subtle that no one seemed to notice. Beneath her soiled healer's dress, beneath the bruises and the chains and the crushing weight of false accusation, something stirred. Something small and fierce and utterly impossible. She was 6 weeks pregnant with a pup she had not planned, had not expected, had not even begun to process. The father had been a rogue she'd healed in secret 3 months ago, a silver-blooded wolf fleeing persecution, whose touch had sparked something Diana still didn't understand. He had vanished before she learned what their single night together had created, and now she carried within her a child whose bloodline was considered cursed by most of the werewolf world. Silver-blooded. The phrase echoed through Diana's racing thoughts as she felt that stirring again, a flutter of silver power that pulsed in answer to her terror. Silver-blooded pups were killed at birth in many packs, considered abominations whose very existence poisoned the bloodlines around them. If the council discovered what grew within her womb, they would not wait until dawn. They would cut the child from her body and burn them both together. She could not die. She could not let them kill her pup. Diana was calculating escape routes, measuring the distance to the door, tensing her muscles for a desperate and probably futile attempt at flight, when the great hall's doors exploded inward. The sound was thunder made manifest, ancient wood shattering against stone walls, and every wolf in the chamber except Diana scrambled to their feet. She remained kneeling, too shocked to move, watching as a wall of warriors in midnight black armor poured through the ruined doorway. They moved in perfect synchronization, their steps shaking dust from the rafters, their hands resting on weapons that gleamed with silver-traced edges. And behind them, walking with the calm certainty of a man who had never been refused, came the Alpha King. Diana had heard stories of Raven Nightshade since childhood, whispered tales of the king who had united the 7 territories through blood and fire and an iron will that had never once bent. They said he was merciless. They said he was ancient despite his youthful appearance, that he had killed so many wolves his soul had turned to ice. They said his eyes held no warmth, his heart held no mercy, and his kingdom held no tolerance for weakness. Looking at him now, Diana believed every word. He stood taller than any wolf she had ever seen, his shoulders broad enough to block the torchlight streaming through the shattered doorway. His hair fell past his shoulders in black waves that seemed to absorb the light around them. His face was all sharp angles, high cheekbones, a hard jaw, a mouth that had clearly forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that stole Diana's breath and held it hostage. Black, pure, endless black, with no distinction between iris and pupil, like staring into twin voids that had consumed countless souls and found them all wanting. Those terrible eyes swept the room and dismissed it. Dismissed the scrambling council members, dismissed Alpha Thornwood's stammered greeting, dismissed everything except. Diana felt the moment his gaze found her. It was a physical weight, a pressure against her skin, a presence that pushed into her consciousness and took inventory of everything it found there. She should have looked away. Every instinct screamed that meeting the eyes of the Alpha King was suicide, that wolves far stronger than her had been destroyed for such presumption. She lifted her head and stared back at him. Something flickered in those black depths. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity at the chained and kneeling woman who dared to meet his gaze. Diana felt her wolf, dormant and defeated since her imprisonment, raise its head for the first time in days, drawn toward this massive predator like a moth toward a flame. "Alpha King!" Thornwood finally managed, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. "We were not expecting the honor of your presence. If we had known, you would have hidden your prisoner more effectively," Raven Nightshade finished, his voice a low rumble that Diana felt in her chest like distant thunder. "Yes, I imagine you would have." He moved forward, and his warriors parted around him like water flowing around a boulder. Each step brought him closer to Diana, and she became acutely aware of everything. The dirt ground into her skin, the blood dried beneath her chains, the desperate, irregular rhythm of her heartbeat. Her pup stirred again, that strange silver flutter of power, and Diana wrapped her arms around her stomach in a protective gesture that was pure instinct. The Alpha King stopped 3 feet from where she knelt and stared down at her with an expression Diana could not begin to read. "This is the healer accused of poisoning your Luna," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Your Majesty." Thornwood's voice trembled with barely concealed fear. "Diana Valewood. She has been found guilty and sentenced to—" "I am aware of the sentence." Raven's dismissal was absolute, cutting through Thornwood's words like a blade through silk. "I am also aware that the evidence against her was provided entirely by her brother, who stands to benefit significantly from her death. I am aware that Luna Sarah has not yet recovered enough to give testimony, and that no independent healer has examined the supposedly poisoned tonic." Diana's heart stopped, then resumed beating in a wild, desperate tattoo against her ribs. He knew. The Alpha King had somehow learned the truth of her situation, had seen through Griffin's lies, had come to— to what? She dared not hope. Hope was a luxury the condemned could not afford. "Your Majesty." Griffin stepped forward, his face a mask of concerned confusion. "I assure you the evidence is incontrovertible. I examined the tonic personally and found—" "I have no interest in your assurances, healer." Raven did not even glance at Griffin, his black eyes still fixed on Diana with that unreadable intensity. "I am invoking the ancient right of royal interrogation. This woman is accused of treason against a Luna, and as such, her alleged crime falls under my jurisdiction. I will be taking her to the capital for questioning." The silence that followed his words was absolute. Diana watched Thornwood's face cycle through a dozen emotions: shock, outrage, fear, and finally a resigned terror that spoke volumes about the Alpha King's reputation. Whatever horrors the capital held, they apparently outweighed even the pack leader's desire to maintain control over his own territory. "Of course, Your Majesty," Thornwood managed. "We would never presume to interfere with royal—" "Remove her chains." Raven's command cracked through the hall like a whip, and suddenly his warriors were moving, 2 of them flanking Diana with their silver-traced swords still sheathed. One knelt beside her and produced a key, his movements efficient and surprisingly gentle as he unlocked the manacles that had scored her wrists raw. The absence of weight was dizzying. Diana swayed, her arms falling uselessly to her sides, blood rushing back into her fingers with pins and needles agony. She tried to stand, tried to maintain some shred of dignity before the wolves who had condemned her, but her legs had different ideas. After 3 days of kneeling on cold stone with minimal food and water, her body simply refused to cooperate. She would have collapsed face first onto the granite if strong hands hadn't caught her. The Alpha King's hands. Diana's breath caught as she found herself lifted effortlessly, one of his arms supporting her back, while the other hooked beneath her knees. He held her against his chest like she weighed nothing, like she was something precious rather than something condemned, and Diana's wolf surged forward with a desperate whine that she barely managed to suppress. Up close, he smelled like pine forests and winter storms, like cold iron and something darker, wilder, more ancient than anything Diana had words for. His heartbeat was steady against her ear, a slow, powerful rhythm that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She should have been terrified. She should have been plotting escape, calculating how to break free of this new captor before he enacted whatever terrible fate he had in store for her. Instead, inexplicably, impossibly, Diana felt safe for the first time since the guards had dragged her from her healing chambers. "If any harm comes to this woman during my absence from your territory," Raven announced, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "I will consider it a personal insult, and I will respond accordingly." He did not wait for a response. He simply turned and walked out of the hall with Diana cradled in his arms, his warriors falling into formation around them, and Griffin's increasingly desperate protests fading into insignificant noise behind them. The night air hit Diana's face like a splash of cold water, sharp and clean after the stale atmosphere of her cell. She gasped, filling her lungs with freedom, and felt tears she could not explain prickling at the corners of her eyes. She was not safe. She knew that. The Alpha King had simply traded one form of captivity for another, and the capital held terrors she could only imagine. She was pregnant with a silver-blooded pup, carrying a secret that could destroy her more thoroughly than any false accusation. But she was alive. Her pup was alive. And for tonight, that would have to be enough. Diana allowed herself one moment of weakness, closing her eyes and letting her head rest against the Alpha King's chest as his warriors escorted them toward waiting horses and an uncertain future. Tomorrow she would be strong. Tomorrow she would plan and scheme and find a way to survive whatever trials awaited her. Tonight, she would simply breathe and feel her pup flutter with strange and silver power and wonder why the most dangerous wolf in 7 territories had chosen to save her life. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and Diana spent most of it drifting between exhausted sleep and hypervigilant awareness. The Alpha King had placed her in a covered wagon rather than forcing her to ride, a consideration that surprised her more than she wanted to admit. The wagon was lined with furs and cushions, stocked with fresh water and dried meat and fruits that she had to force herself to eat despite her churning stomach. Her pup seemed to appreciate the nourishment, settling into quiet contentment whenever Diana managed to keep food down. The strange silver flutters had become more frequent during the journey, and Diana found herself pressing her palm against her stomach often, marveling at the stubborn life growing within her. She did not see the Alpha King again during the journey. His warriors guarded the wagon in rotating shifts, their faces impassive beneath black helmets, their responses to her tentative questions limited to monosyllables. They were not cruel. They brought her food, allowed her privacy for personal needs, even provided clean water for washing the grime of imprisonment from her skin. But they were not friendly either. Diana was a prisoner, and they were her keepers. The arrangement required nothing more. On the 3rd night, the wagon rolled through gates that seemed to stretch toward the stars themselves, and Diana pulled back the canvas covering to catch her first glimpse of the capital. As they arrived, one of Raven's healers brought her a small vial with careful instructions. "For what's to come," the woman said cryptically, placing it in Diana's trembling hands. Diana recognized the formula immediately, a counteragent to the very poison Griffin favored. The healer knew then. Raven had anticipated everything. The royal palace of Nightshade rose from the heart of the city like a mountain made of black stone and silver starlight. Towers spiraled toward the moon in impossible configurations, their peaks lost in clouds that seemed to gather specifically around the highest spires. Gardens spread across the grounds in geometric precision, winter roses blooming in defiance of the cold, their petals dark red against the snow that dusted everything in crystalline white. Torches burned in brackets along every wall, their flames a deep purple that cast strange shadows across the cobblestone paths. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was nothing like the simple stone halls of the Thornwood Pack territory, and Diana felt her heart constrict with a homesickness so sharp it stole her breath. She had no home now. Griffin had made certain of that. The wagon stopped before the palace's main entrance, and Diana found herself escorted through doors that must have been carved from single massive trees, their surfaces covered in reliefs depicting wolves and moons and battles that spanned centuries of history. She walked on legs that trembled with exhaustion and fear, flanked by guards who moved with practiced efficiency, through halls so vast that her footsteps echoed like whispers in a cathedral. Finally, they stopped before a door of polished ebony, and one of the guards knocked twice. "Enter." The Alpha King's voice, even muffled by wood, sent shivers down Diana's spine. The door swung open, and Diana stepped into what could only be a private study. Books lined every wall, their spines cracked with age, their titles written in languages Diana did not recognize. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows across thick carpets and heavy furniture. Maps covered a massive desk near the windows, their surfaces marked with pins and notations that suggested military precision. And there, standing before the fire with his back to her, was the wolf who had claimed her from execution. Raven Nightshade had changed from his traveling clothes into something simpler. Dark trousers and a white shirt that stretched across his shoulders, his black hair pulled back from his face with a leather cord. He seemed larger in this intimate setting, more real, more dangerous. Diana's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, responding to his presence with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Leave us," Raven commanded without turning, and the guards withdrew instantly, the door closing behind them with a soft click that sounded entirely too final. Diana stood frozen in the center of the room, acutely aware of her travel-stained clothes and unwashed hair, of the dark circles beneath her eyes, and the fear that surely painted itself across every line of her face. She waited for the Alpha King to speak, to explain why he had saved her, to reveal what terrible purpose he intended for her. He turned. Those black eyes swept over her with the same unreadable intensity she remembered from the Great Hall, cataloging every detail of her appearance with the precision of a predator assessing prey. Diana fought the urge to wrap her arms around her stomach, to hide her pup from his penetrating gaze, but she forced herself to remain still. She would not show weakness. She would not give him the satisfaction. "You look better than you did 3 days ago," Raven observed, his deep voice neutral. "The color has returned to your face. The food was acceptable?" It was such an unexpected question that Diana found herself answering before she could think better of it. "Yes, thank you. For the wagon. For the provisions." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his harsh features. "You expected chains and a bear cart?" "I expected nothing kind from the wolf they call the Merciless King." The words escaped before Diana could stop them, and she immediately wished she could claw them back. Insulting the most powerful alpha in 7 territories while standing alone in his private study was not a survival strategy she would have consciously chosen. But Raven merely raised one dark eyebrow, that almost amusement deepening into genuine approval. "You have spirit. Your brother claimed you were meek and easily manipulated, but he appears to have lied about many things." The mention of Griffin sent ice through Diana's veins. "You know what he did." "I know what I suspect." Raven moved toward her, his steps silent on the thick carpet, and Diana found herself rooting in place despite every instinct screaming at her to retreat. "Which is why I brought you here. To confirm my suspicions." He stopped directly before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his pine and winter scent wrapped around her like a physical embrace. Diana's wolf whined desperately, pressing against the boundaries of her consciousness with an urgency that made no sense. "I am going to ask you questions," Raven continued, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated through Diana's bones. "And you are going to answer them truthfully. Do you understand?" Diana nodded, not trusting her voice. "Look at me when you answer." The command was absolute, brooking no argument, and Diana obeyed without thinking. She raised her eyes to meet his, expecting to see that endless black void that had haunted her dreams during the journey. What she saw instead changed everything. Raven's hand shot out, gripping her chin with fingers that were surprisingly gentle despite their strength. He tilted her face toward the firelight, studying her features with an intensity that should have felt invasive, but instead sent warmth cascading through Diana's chest, like molten gold flooding her veins. The sensation started at the point where his skin touched hers, spreading outward in waves that left her nerve endings singing and her heart racing with something that was not quite fear. His eyes. His eyes were still black, but something was happening to them. Something that looked almost like light trying to break through from behind. Diana watched in shocked fascination as gold began to bleed into that endless darkness, spreading from the pupils outward in rays that reminded her of sunrise breaking over a winter horizon. Raven's breath caught audibly, a sharp intake that seemed to steal the air from the entire room. His fingers tightened on her chin, not painfully but with a desperation that made no sense, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Not threatening, but something rawer. Recognition. Primal and undeniable. Impossible, he breathed. The word barely more than an exhale. Diana's wolf surged forward with desperate recognition of her own, clawing toward the surface with an intensity that would have terrified Diana if she had been capable of feeling anything beyond the overwhelming sensation flooding her body. It was heat and light, and a pulling that seemed to originate from somewhere deep in her chest, an invisible thread snapping taut between her and the Alpha King, connecting them in ways she could not begin to understand. Her body swayed toward his without her permission, drawn by a force stronger than gravity, stronger than fear, stronger than the desperate voice in her head screaming warnings about trusting any alpha with her safety. Her wolf was whining now, a high, desperate sound that vibrated through Diana's consciousness, and she could feel her pup stirring too, that strange silver flutter responding to whatever was happening between her and this terrifying, beautiful wolf. 3 heartbeats passed in perfect silence, their eyes locked together as the bond pulsed between them like a shared heartbeat, like a promise, like a prison from which neither could escape. What? Diana's voice cracked, and she had to swallow twice before she could continue. What is happening to me? Raven released her chin abruptly, stepping back with a motion that looked almost like retreat, though the Alpha King retreated from nothing. His golden eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that bordered on violence, his chest rising and falling with breaths that seemed deliberately controlled, and Diana noticed that his hands were shaking. The Alpha King's hands were shaking. "You are my mate," he said flatly, the words carrying no emotion despite the staggering weight of their meaning. The true mate bond. I have not felt it in over 200 years, and I had believed myself incapable of feeling it again. Diana's legs gave out. She would have crumpled to the floor if Raven hadn't moved, faster than anything that large should be able to move, catching her before she hit the ground and lifting her into his arms, exactly as he had in the Great Hall. Her head spun with too many revelations, too many truths crashing through her consciousness like waves against a crumbling shore. Mate, true mate, 200 years. How old are you? The question escaped before Diana could stop it, which seemed to be becoming a pattern around this particular wolf. Raven carried her to a chair near the fire and settled her into it with surprising gentleness, kneeling before her so that their eyes were level. His were still gold, still burning with that feral light, and Diana found that she could not look away from them no matter how hard she tried. "Old enough to have believed myself beyond such things," he answered, his voice rough. "Old enough to have buried 3 wives and countless others who tried to claim the bond that was not theirs to claim. Old enough to have stopped hoping." Diana's heart clenched at the pain she heard beneath his careful words. 200 years of loss. 200 years of watching others grow old and die while he remained. 200 years of loneliness that she could barely begin to comprehend. "I cannot be your mate," she whispered, though even as she said the words, She felt their falseness vibrating through the bond that now connected them. I am a condemned prisoner. I am pregnant with another wolf's pup. I am. You are mine. The words were not a question. They were not a demand. They were simply truth, stated with the absolute certainty of a king who had ruled for centuries. The bond does not lie, Diana Valewood. It does not make mistakes. Whatever else you are, whatever else has happened to bring you here, you are my true mate. And I have not survived this long by ignoring the gifts the moon chooses to give me. Diana opened her mouth to argue, to point out all the reasons this could not be, to explain about the silver-blooded pup and the rogue who had fathered it, and the curse that supposedly ran through her child's veins. But before she could speak, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and the room tilted sickeningly to one side. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the Alpha King's golden eyes widening with concern, and she felt his arms catch her as she fell. Diana woke to softness. For a long moment she simply lay still, luxuriating in the sensation of silk sheets against her skin and thick blankets cocooning her in warmth. Her body ached in ways that spoke of deep exhaustion finally beginning to heal, and her mouth tasted of herbs she vaguely recognized. Something for nausea, something for strength, something for the pup that still fluttered occasionally beneath her heart. The pup. The memory of what had happened crashed through Diana's consciousness, and she bolted upright so fast that her vision swam, and she had to grip the bedposts to keep from falling. She was in a bed. A massive bed, with posts carved from dark wood and curtains of deep blue velvet pulled back to reveal a room that could have housed her entire healing chamber from home. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling along one wall, revealing a balcony beyond them and a view of the capital that sparkled with light stretching toward the distant mountains. A fire crackled in a hearth that matched the one in the study, and candles burned in sconces along the walls, casting everything in a warm golden glow. And there, sitting in a chair beside the bed, with a cool cloth in his hands and exhaustion carved into every line of his harsh face, was the Alpha King. You collapsed from pregnancy sickness, Raven said without preamble, his golden eyes, still golden, still burning with that unnatural light, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Your body has been under extreme stress, and the pup is drawing more energy than you have been able to replenish. You have been unconscious for 6 hours. Diana's hand flew to her stomach, panic clawing at her throat. Is the pup? The pup is fine. Raven's voice softened slightly, though his expression remained carved from stone. More than fine. The palace healers were impressed by its strength. They said they had never felt such powerful life force in one so young. The relief that flooded Diana was so intense that tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed both hands against her belly, feeling that familiar silver flutter, and for a moment she forgot everything. Forgot the mate bond, forgot the Alpha King watching her, forgot the danger and the fear and the absurdity of her situation. Her pup was alive. Her pup was strong. Nothing else mattered. You could have called servants to tend to me, Diana said finally, wiping her tears with the back of her hand and trying to regain some composure. You did not need to stay. Raven's expression flickered, something crossing his features too quickly for Diana to identify. You are my mate. I do not entrust my mate's care to servants. I am also a prisoner accused of treason. You are innocent of the charges against you. He said it with absolute certainty, as though there were no possibility of doubt. I reviewed the evidence before I came for you. Your brother's story has inconsistencies that only a fool would overlook, and Alpha Thornwood is many things, but he is not typically a fool. Which means he was complicit in the false accusation, or he was too distracted by grief over his Luna's loss to examine the facts clearly. Diana stared at him, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like hope. You believe me? Without even hearing my side, you believe me. I believe the evidence. I believe the bond that tells me you are not capable of the cruelty you were accused of. And I believe my own instincts, which have kept me alive for 2 centuries. Raven leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his golden eyes never leaving her face. My intelligence network monitors every trial that carries a death sentence across the 7 territories. Most are unremarkable. Yours was not. A healer with no history of violence, convicted on evidence provided solely by the one wolf who stood to gain from her death, with no independent examination of the tonic and no testimony from the victim herself. It was sloppy, Diana. The kind of frame that only works when no one with authority is paying attention. His jaw tightened. I made it my business to pay attention. But I would hear your side. I would know what truly happened in your own words. So Diana told him. She told him everything. Her training under Griffin, her growing skills as a healer, the jealousy she had been too naive to recognize in her own brother's eyes. She told him about the night Luna Sarah had collapsed, about the horror of watching her brother's face as he pointed the finger of accusation at her. She told him about the 3 days of imprisonment, the mock trial, the sentence of death by silver burning. She even told him about the silver-blooded rogue she had healed in secret, about the night they had shared that she still did not fully understand, about the pup that now grew within her carrying a bloodline most wolves considered cursed. My own blood is pure thornwood, she explained quietly. Traditional wolf. This silver. It comes entirely from the rogue. I have no idea what that will mean for her, what she will be capable of. When she finished, Raven was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes unreadable. Silver-blooded, he said finally, and there was something strange in his voice. Wonder. Do you know how rare that bloodline is? Do you know what silver-blooded wolves were, before fear and ignorance drove them to near extinction? Diana shook her head, her throat too tight for words. They were protectors. Raven rose from his chair and moved to the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the lights of the city beyond. In the time of the first kings, silver-blooded wolves were considered blessed by the moon herself. Their blood carried properties that could heal any wound, cure any poison, protect against any dark magic. The ancient kings sought them as royal guardians, as trusted advisors, as the most loyal and powerful warriors in any pack. He turned back to face her, and Diana saw something in his expression that made her heart stutter. Reverence, open and unguarded. Your pup is not cursed, Diana. Your pup is rare beyond measure. Your pup is precious beyond anything you could imagine. He moved back toward the bed, sinking into the chair beside her once more. And I will not allow anyone to harm either of you. Not your brother. Not the council. Not any wolf in any territory who dares to threaten what is mine. The possessiveness in his words should have frightened Diana. She had spent her life being controlled by others, by her father before he left, by Griffin who had trained her, by pack law that dictated every aspect of a healer's existence. She should have bristled at being claimed so absolutely by a wolf she had only just met. Instead, she felt something inside her relax for the first time since the guards had dragged her from her chambers. You cannot simply declare me yours, she said quietly, though there was no real protest in her voice. The Pack Council, the other territories, they will not accept. I am the Alpha King. Raven's voice brooked no argument. I do not require anyone's acceptance. I require only their obedience. It was arrogant. It was autocratic. It was exactly what Diana would have expected from the wolf they called merciless. It was also, she realized with a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her pup, incredibly reassuring. The next days passed in a blur of recovery and revelation. Diana learned that the palace healers were the finest in 7 territories, their skills honed through centuries of service to the Nightshade line. They tended to her with a deference that confused her until she realized they had already heard the rumors that the Alpha King had claimed a pregnant prisoner as his true mate, that the pup she carried was silver-blooded, that everything they thought they knew about their ruler was about to change. She learned that Raven visited her chambers every evening without fail, sitting beside her bed for hours as she drifted between sleep and waking. He brought her books from his study, ancient texts about healing arts that made her eyes widen with wonder. He brought her food prepared specifically to address her pregnancy sickness, dishes so carefully crafted that she could keep them down when nothing else would stay. He brought her information about her brother's movements, about the investigation he had quietly launched into Lunacera's poisoning, about the net that was slowly closing around Griffin's lies. One evening, he explained the vial she had been given upon arrival. My agents obtained samples from Lunacera's healers months ago, he said. My alchemists identified the specific compound, a thornroot moonsbane hybrid, rare enough that only a handful of healers in 7 territories would know how to synthesize it. Your brother is one of them. The counteragent was prepared as a precaution the moment I decided to bring you here, in case he followed. And he brought her himself, his steady presence, his surprising gentleness, his absolute certainty that she was innocent and precious and his. On the 5th night, Diana felt strong enough to leave her bed and walk the balcony outside her chambers. She stood at the railing, wrapped in a thick robe against the winter chill, and watched the moon rise over the distant mountains. Her pup kicked lazily against her palm, silver power fluttering through her veins like stardust. You should be resting. Diana turned to find Raven stepping through the balcony doors, his expression caught between concern and something softer, something she was beginning to recognize as the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. I needed air, she said simply. I have spent too many days in bed. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth cutting through the cold night air. For a long moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the moon paint silver light across the city spread beneath them. The council meets tomorrow, Raven said finally, his voice carefully neutral. They will want to discuss your situation, your presence in the palace, your condition. Diana's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. They will not accept a pregnant prisoner as their queen. You are not a prisoner. You are under my protection, and that is an entirely different thing. He turned to face her, his golden eyes burning in the moonlight. And they will accept whatever I tell them to accept, or they will face consequences they will not enjoy. You cannot force them to respect me. I can force them to treat you with respect. What they feel in their hearts is their own concern. His jaw tightened, something dangerous flickering across his features. But if any of them disrespects you publicly, if any of them dares to suggest you are less than the mate of their king, Raven. Diana reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing against his forearm. The touch sent electricity sparking through her veins, the mate bond flaring to life between them. You cannot execute everyone who speaks against me. That is not how you win loyalty. He stared down at her hand on his arm, his expression unreadable. I have not survived 2 centuries by seeking loyalty. I have survived by ensuring those who oppose me have no opportunity to do so twice. Is that what you want? Wolves who obey you out of fear? It is what I have always had. What I have always needed. His voice was rough, and Diana heard loneliness beneath it, raw and unguarded. Fear is reliable. Fear is predictable. Fear does not betray you in the night because it has found someone younger or more powerful to warm its bed. Diana's heart clenched at the pain she heard beneath his careful words. Is that what happened? With your previous wives? Raven was silent for so long that Diana thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, His voice was barely above a whisper. I have buried 3 wolves I believed were my mates. 3 wolves who swore eternal devotion and then grew old in my arms while I remained unchanged. 3 wolves who loved me at first and then came to resent me for the immortality I could not share with them. He turned away from her, his massive shoulders rigid with tension. The last one tried to poison me. She had been seduced by a rival who promised her youth and power if she helped him take my throne. I killed her myself, and I swore I would never take another mate. The agony in his words stole Diana's breath. 200 years of loss, 200 years of betrayal, 200 years of learning that love was just another weapon that could be used against him. I am not them, Diana said softly, stepping closer to him despite every instinct warning her to maintain distance. I do not want your throne. I do not want your power. I do not even understand what I want, beyond the chance to raise my pup in safety. Raven turned back to face her, and Diana saw fear in his golden eyes. Real fear, the kind that had nothing to do with battle. The bond is not a choice, Diana. It does not care what we want. It simply is, and it will demand things from both of us that we may not be prepared to give. Then we will figure it out together. The words escaped before Diana could stop them, and she watched his expression shift, surprise and hope, and something deeper flickering across his harsh features. I am not asking you to love me, Raven. I am not asking for forever. I am only asking for the chance to prove that I am not another weapon waiting to be used against you. He stared at her for an endless moment, the moonlight casting his face in silver and shadow. Then, so slowly that Diana barely registered the movement, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek, his touch impossibly gentle for such a powerful wolf. You are stronger than you know, he murmured, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. Stronger than anyone I have met in centuries, and I find myself hoping, which is not something I have allowed myself in a very long time. Diana leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her wolf humming with contentment at the contact. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and steady, and for the first time since this strange journey began, Diana allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for. The council meeting the next morning was every bit as terrible as Diana had feared. She dressed in clothes that had been provided for her, a gown of deep blue velvet that matched the curtains of her bed, with silver embroidery at the cuffs, and hem that caught the light when she moved. Her hair had been washed and brushed until it shone, braided back from her face in a style that was both elegant and practical. She admitted when she caught her reflection in the mirror, almost like someone who belonged in a palace. Almost. Raven came to escort her personally, and Diana saw pride flicker in his golden eyes when he beheld her. He offered his arm in a gesture so formal that it made her heart stutter, and Diana took it, feeling the solid warmth of his muscles beneath her fingers, drawing strength from his presence as they walked toward the council chambers. The council itself consisted of 12 wolves, advisors and generals and territory representatives who had sworn allegiance to the Nightshade throne. They sat in carved chairs around a massive circular table, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile, as Raven led Diana to a seat at his right hand. Your Majesty. The wolf who spoke first was ancient, his face weathered by centuries of politics and power. We were not aware that the council would be expanded today. The council has not been expanded, Lord Varen. Raven's voice was ice and iron, brooking no argument. Diana Valewood is here as my guest, to observe and to answer any questions the council may have regarding her situation. Murmurs rippled around the table, and Diana felt their eyes on her like physical weights. She straightened her spine, calling on every shred of dignity she possessed, and met their stares without flinching. The situation, as Your Majesty calls it, is concerning. Another wolf spoke, his tone dripping with barely concealed contempt. A traitor accused of poisoning a Luna, carrying a bastard pup with cursed blood, suddenly appearing in the palace under royal protection. The territories are already whispering about the king's judgment. Let them whisper. Raven's dismissal was absolute. I have never concerned myself with gossip, and I will not begin now. This is not gossip, Your Majesty. Lord Varen leaned forward, his ancient eyes sharp with triumph. This is a matter of royal succession. If you intend to claim this woman as a mate, and the rumors suggest you do, then her pup becomes a factor in the line of inheritance. A silver-blooded pup, no less. The territories will not accept. The territories will accept what I command them to accept. Raven's voice dropped to a dangerous growl, and Diana felt the power radiating from him like heat from a furnace. And I grow weary of wolves who presume to tell their king what he may or may not do. Your Majesty. Enough. The word cracked through the chamber like thunder, and every wolf at the table flinched. Diana Valewood is innocent of the charges against her. I have evidence that her brother Griffin Valewood, a wolf many of you have met, a wolf who has visited this very palace under the guise of diplomatic missions, is the true poisoner. He will be brought to justice, and Diana will be cleared of all accusations. Silence fell over the table, heavy and absolute. Diana saw expressions shifting, calculations being made, alliances being reconsidered. The Alpha King had just declared her innocent before his entire council, had just staked his reputation on her virtue, had just made it clear that anyone who opposed her was opposing him. And the pup? Lord Varen's voice was carefully neutral now, all traces of contempt smoothed away. The silver-blooded pup she carries? Raven turned to look at Diana, and something in his golden eyes made her breath catch. The pup, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the chamber, will be raised in this palace. It will be educated by the finest tutors in 7 territories. It will be protected by the full power of the Nightshade throne. He reached out and took Diana's hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a kiss against her knuckles in a gesture so tender, so public, so unmistakably possessive that Diana felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. And when the time comes, Raven continued, his voice dropping to a vow, it will be raised as the child of the Alpha King, not as a bastard, not as an abomination, but as the heir to everything I have built, if Diana will have me. The council erupted into chaos. Diana barely heard the shouting, the demands for explanation, the protests and proclamations that filled the chamber like a violent storm. She could only stare at Raven, at this extraordinary wolf who had just offered her more than she had ever dared to hope for, and feel the mate bond pulsing between them like a shared heartbeat. You cannot, she whispered, her voice too soft for anyone but him to hear. Raven, you cannot give my pup your name. You cannot make it your heir. The father abandoned you before you even knew you carried his child. Raven's voice was fierce, his golden eyes burning with intensity. The father is not here, has never been here, will never be here. I am here. I will be here. And if you allow it, Diana Valewood, I will love that pup as though it were my own blood. I will raise it and protect it, and teach it everything I know. Why? The word escaped on a broken breath. Why would you do this for a wolf you barely know? Raven cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Because you are my mate, he said simply. Because the bond does not lie. Because I have spent 200 years waiting for you without knowing it. And now that I have found you, I will not let anything, not council politics, not bloodline prejudice, not my own fear, keep me from claiming what is mine. He kissed her then, there in front of the entire council, and Diana felt the world narrow down to nothing but the heat of his lips against hers and the promise in his touch. When they finally broke apart, the chamber had fallen silent. Diana looked around at the council members, at their shocked faces, their calculating eyes, their barely concealed emotions, and felt something shift inside her. Something that had been curled tight in fear and self-protection for years began to unfurl, reaching toward the light like a flower too long kept in shadow. She was not alone anymore. She had not been alone since the moment Raven Nightshade had caught her in his arms and carried her out of the great hall where her brother had tried to have her killed. And whatever came next, whatever trials and dangers still awaited her, she would face them with the Alpha King at her side. The chamber remained frozen in stunned silence for 3 heartbeats after the kiss ended, and Diana could feel every eye upon her like physical weight pressing against her skin. She was acutely aware of Raven's hand still clasped in hers, of the warmth radiating from his massive frame, of the mate bond thrumming between them with such intensity that she could almost hear it singing in her blood. Then the doors at the far end of the council chamber crashed open. Diana's heart seized in her chest as a familiar figure strode through the entrance, flanked by 4 wolves in the gray and green colors of the Thornwood pack. Griffin Valewood walked with the confidence of a wolf who believed himself untouchable, his healer's robes immaculate, his dark hair swept back from a face that had once seemed kind to her. Now she could see the cruelty that lurked beneath his practiced smile, the calculation in eyes that matched her own. Her brother. Her betrayer. The wolf who had trained her in the healing arts and then used that knowledge to destroy her. "Forgive the interruption, Alpha King." Griffin's voice was smooth as silk, carrying easily across the chamber. He bowed with elaborate courtesy, but his eyes never left Diana's face. "I come as an ambassador from Thornwood, bearing messages of peace and reconciliation from Alpha Vance." Diana felt Raven's hand tighten around hers, felt the growl building in his chest before it escaped his lips. "You dare," he said softly, and the quiet menace in his voice made several council members step backward. "You dare to enter my court after what you did to your own sister." "After what I did?" Griffin spread his hands in a gesture of wounded innocence. "My king, I merely spoke the truth before the Thornwood Council. Diana was found with the poison tonic in her hands. The evidence was fabricated." Diana's voice emerged stronger than she expected, steadied by the warmth of Raven's presence beside her. "You planted that tonic in my supplies, Griffin. You framed me for a crime you committed." Something flickered in her brother's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she would dare to accuse him so openly, but his smile never wavered. "My dear sister, your pregnancy has clearly affected your mind, the trauma of your situation, the stress of carrying a silver-blooded abomination. You will not speak of her pup that way." Raven's voice cracked like thunder through the chamber. "You will not speak of her at all, except to answer my questions. Why are you here, healer? What does Thornwood want?" Griffin's smile widened, and Diana felt ice forming in her veins. She knew that smile. It was the expression he wore when he was about to deliver particularly devastating news, when he held all the cards and wanted his opponent to know it. "Alpha Vance wishes to extend his deepest apologies for any misunderstanding regarding Diana's trial," Griffin said smoothly. "He has come to believe that perhaps the evidence was not as conclusive as initially thought. He offers to re-examine the case, to potentially clear Diana's name, in exchange for certain considerations from the Nightshade throne." "What considerations?" Raven's voice was dangerously soft. "Trade agreements, border adjustments, a formal alliance between our packs." Griffin paused, his eyes sliding to Diana with undisguised hunger. "And of course, the return of Diana to Thornwood territory for the duration of the investigation. For her own protection, you understand. To ensure the process is thorough." Diana's blood turned to ice. Return to Thornwood. Return to the pack that had condemned her to death. To the territory where Griffin could do whatever he wished to her without interference. She understood now why he had come, understood the trap he was laying with such careful precision. If Raven refused, it would look like he was protecting a criminal. If he agreed, Diana would be delivered back into her brother's hands, where she and her pup would quietly disappear before the investigation could clear her name. No. Raven's response was immediate and absolute. Diana remains under my protection. Any investigation into her case will be conducted here, by my own people, with full access to all evidence and witnesses. Griffin's smile didn't waver, but something dark flickered in his eyes. I see. The Alpha King is quite attached to my sister. How interesting. I wonder what Luna Sarah would think, knowing that her attempted murderer has found such a powerful protector. Luna Sarah is recovering well, Diana said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. The Alpha King's intelligence network has been monitoring her progress. The damage was less severe than initially believed. With proper care, she may yet conceive again. For just a moment, Griffin's mask slipped. Fury blazed in his eyes, hot and vicious, before he smoothed his expression back into practiced concern. How wonderful. I'm so relieved to hear it. But Diana had seen. She had seen the rage, the frustration, the hatred that lurked beneath her brother's polished surface. And she understood, with sudden crystalline clarity, that Luna Sarah's recovery was not good news for Griffin Valewood. Because if Luna Sarah recovered completely, if she conceived again, if she bore healthy pups, then whatever scheme Griffin had set in motion by poisoning her would have failed. And wolves like Griffin did not take failure well. Diana's hand drifted unconsciously to her belly, where her pup stirred with restless energy. She could feel the silver power crackling through her veins, could sense her child's awareness of the threat that stood before them. Her pup knew, somehow, impossibly, her unborn child recognized the danger that Griffin represented. You will be given guest quarters, Raven said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You will remain there until I have considered Thornwood's proposal. Any attempt to approach Diana, to speak with her privately, to interfere with her in any way, will be considered an act of war against the Nightshade throne. Griffin bowed again, his movements too smooth, too practiced. Of course, my king. I would never dream of disturbing my sister's recovery. His eyes met Diana's across the chamber, and she saw the promise in them, the threat, the absolute certainty that he would find a way to finish what he had started. Guards, Raven commanded, escort our guest to the East Wing. Post sentries at his door. He is not to leave his quarters without explicit permission from me or the Lady Diana. As Griffin was led away, Diana felt her knees threatening to buckle. The mate bond pulsed between her and Raven, warm and reassuring, but fear still coiled in her stomach like a venomous serpent. Griffin was here. Griffin was in the palace, breathing the same air as her, walking the same halls, and she knew with terrible certainty that he would not rest until she was silenced forever. Raven's arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her. Come, he murmured against her hair. We need to talk. Privately. Diana nodded, allowing him to guide her from the council chamber as whispers erupted in their wake. She could feel the eyes of the council members upon her, could sense their speculation and suspicion. But all of that faded to insignificance compared to the weight of what she now understood. Griffin had not come to Nightshade territory to negotiate. He had not come to seek reconciliation or peace. He had come to finish his original crime, and Diana was quite certain that this time he intended to leave no witnesses. The corridors of the palace passed in a blur of torchlight and shadow. Diana was dimly aware of guards nodding as they passed, of servants pressing themselves against walls to make way for the Alpha King and his mate. but her mind was elsewhere, spinning through possibilities and fears, trying to understand the full scope of her brother's plan. Raven led her not to the council chambers or his study, but to a small solar at the heart of the palace. The room was warm with firelight, furnished with soft chairs and scattered with books and papers. It felt lived in, intimate, the private sanctuary of a wolf who spent too much time attending to matters of state and too little time simply existing. "Sit," Raven said gently, guiding her to a chair by the fire. "You're trembling." Diana hadn't realized she was shaking until he said it. She sank into the chair's embrace, her hands folding protectively over her belly. Her pup kicked against her palms, restless and agitated, sensing her distress. "He's going to kill me." The words emerged flat, emotionless, as though she were discussing the weather. "Griffin. He came here to kill me, didn't he?" Raven crouched before her, taking her hands in his. His golden eyes blazed with fierce protectiveness, with a possessiveness that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel safer than she had in years. "He will not touch you. I will not allow it." "You might not be able to stop him." Diana's voice cracked. "You don't know Griffin like I do. He's patient. He's clever. He spent months planning how to frame me for Lunacera's poisoning, and I never suspected anything until it was too late." "Tell me." Raven's voice was soft but commanding. "Tell me everything about your brother. Help me understand what we're facing." Diana closed her eyes, drawing in a shuddering breath. The memories rose like bile in her throat. Years of training under Griffin's tutelage, of believing he was helping her develop her gifts, of trusting him with everything she was. "Griffin was always jealous of me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "From the time we were pups, he resented that my healing abilities came easier than his. He had to work for every technique, study for every treatment, while I simply knew. The plants spoke to me. The remedies revealed themselves. The damaged flesh and bone showed me what they needed to heal." "A true healer's gift," Raven murmured. "Rare. Precious." Griffin didn't see it that way. He saw me as a threat. To his position, to his reputation, to everything he had built. When I started surpassing him in skill, when the pack began coming to me instead of him for their ailments, something changed in him. The resentment curdled into hatred. Diana's hands tightened around Raven's, drawing strength from his warmth. But he was clever about it. He never showed his true feelings. He continued to train me, to praise my abilities in public. Everyone thought we were devoted to each other, that our bond as siblings was unbreakable. "And Lunacera?" Raven prompted gently. "What happened with her pregnancy?" Pain lanced through Diana's chest. "She came to both of us when she discovered she was carrying pups. Griffin was the pack's lead healer. Protocol demanded that he oversee her care. But Sarah trusted me. She asked me to prepare her tonics, to monitor her progress. And I was so proud, so honored that she had chosen me." Tears slipped down Diana's cheeks, hot and bitter. "I never noticed Griffin tampering with the medicines. I never suspected that he was adding something to the tonics before I delivered them. He was so careful, so methodical. A little poison here, a little more there. Never enough to be detected, but always enough to do damage." "He was poisoning Lunacera through your hands," Raven said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Making you the instrument of his crime." Diana nodded miserably. "When she lost the pups, when the healers tested the tonic and found the poison, all the evidence pointed to me. My supplies, my preparations, my fingerprints on every vial." Griffin stood before the council and wept as he accused me. He said he had trusted me, defended me, believed in me, and I had betrayed him. She laughed bitterly. "I believed him at first. I thought I must have made a mistake, must have accidentally added something toxic without realizing. It wasn't until I was in chains, waiting for execution, that I began to question. That I started remembering all the times Griffin had visited my workspace, all the opportunities he had to contaminate my supplies. Raven rose, he pacing before the fire with barely contained violence in every step. He will answer for this. I swear it on my crown, on my blood, on the mate bond that binds us. Griffin Valewood will face justice for what he has done. But we have no proof. Diana's voice was hollow. His word against mine, and I'm a condemned traitor in the eyes of 7 packs. No one will believe me. Raven turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. There was calculation there, mixed with fierce determination. Then we will find proof. Or we will create circumstances that force him to reveal himself. What do you mean? Your brother came here with a purpose beyond the false peace offering. Raven's voice was soft, dangerous. He expected you to be isolated, vulnerable, easily eliminated. Instead, he found you under my protection, bearing my mark as mate, carrying a pup that I have publicly claimed as my own. His original plan has failed. He will need to adapt. Diana's heart stuttered. You think he'll try again? Here, in your own palace? I think he has no choice. Raven crouched before her again, taking her face in his hands. Griffin cannot allow you to live, cannot allow Luna Sarah to recover completely, cannot allow the truth to emerge. He is trapped now, cornered by his own scheming, and cornered wolves make mistakes. The firelight played across Raven's features, highlighting the sharp planes of his face, the burning gold of his eyes. Diana found herself leaning into his touch, drawing comfort from the simple contact. The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and reassuring, a constant reminder that she was not facing this alone. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Not just for myself, for my pup. If Griffin succeeds, if he finds a way to... He will not. Raven's voice was absolute, brooking no argument. I will not allow it. Every guard in this palace will be watching for threats. Every servant, every courtier, every wolf who draws breath within these walls will be an obstacle between your brother and his goal. Guards won't stop Griffin. Diana sat forward, her fear giving way to the clinical focus that had made her a gifted healer. He won't come at me with a blade. He'll use poison. It's what he knows, what he's practiced. He'll find a way past your sentries because poison doesn't need to be delivered in person. A contaminated meal, a treated cloth, a tincture slipped into my drinking water. Your soldiers can't guard against what they can't see. Raven went still. For the first time since she'd met him, Diana saw uncertainty cross his face. Not fear, but the honest discomfort of a wolf confronting a threat his strength alone couldn't answer. Then what do you suggest? He asked, and the question cost him something. 2 centuries of solving problems through force and authority, and here was a danger that required a healer's mind, not a king's power. Let me prepare, Diana said. I know Griffin's methods. I know which poisons he favors, which compounds he would have access to on short notice. Give me your alchemist's workshop and I can build counteragents for every toxin in his arsenal. And when he makes his move, because he will, I'll be ready. Not because your guards caught him, but because I outmatched him at his own craft. Raven studied her for a long moment, and Diana watched something shift behind his golden eyes. Not defeat, recognition. The acknowledgement that his mate possessed knowledge he did not, and that wisdom lay in trusting it. You'll have the workshop by morning, he said quietly. And anything else you need. Diana's eyes filled with fresh tears. Why? She whispered. Why are you doing all this for me? We barely know each other. A few days ago, I was a condemned criminal being dragged to your court in chains. Raven's thumbs brushed across her cheeks, wiping away the tears with infinite gentleness. Because you are mine. he said simply. The bond recognized it before either of us understood. You are my mate, Diana Valewood, the other half of my soul, the wolf I have waited 2 centuries to find. There is nothing I would not do to protect you, nothing I would not sacrifice to keep you safe. His lips brushed against her forehead, soft as a whisper. And because I know what it is to be betrayed by blood, to have the wolves who should have protected you become the ones who seek your destruction, I will not let that happen to you. Not while I draw breath. Diana's walls, already crumbling, fractured further. She had spent so long building defenses around her heart, convincing herself that she needed no one, could trust no one. Her own brother had proven how dangerous it was to let anyone close. But Raven was different. The mate bond ensured it, wove their souls together in ways that left no room for deception. She could feel his emotions bleeding through the connection between them. Fierce protectiveness, growing tenderness, desire held carefully in check. He wanted her. She could sense that clearly, could feel the heat of his longing every time their eyes met. But he was restraining himself, giving her time to adjust, to choose, to come to him on her own terms. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate for the gratitude swelling in her chest. For everything you've done, for believing me when no one else would. Raven smiled, and the expression transformed his harsh features into something almost beautiful. I would believe you if the entire world stood against us. I would believe you if the evidence itself rose up to contradict your words. The bond does not lie, little healer. And the bond tells me that you are pure of heart, pure of intention. Whatever crimes others have accused you of, your soul is innocent. Diana's pup kicked strongly against her belly as if in agreement. She laughed softly, pressing her hands to the movement. The little one seems to approve of you. Raven's eyes dropped to her stomach, and wonder flickered across his face. May I? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Diana hesitated for just a heartbeat before nodding. Raven's large hand pressed gently against her belly, warm through the fabric of her gown. Almost immediately the pup stirred, pressing back against his palm as if recognizing his touch. Silver-blooded, Raven murmured. I can feel the power already, so strong for one not yet born. A daughter, I think. I can sense her strength, her fierce spirit. She will be formidable. Does it frighten you? Diana asked. The silver blood? Everyone else seems to think it's a curse. The old kings knew better. Raven's hand remained on her belly, moving in slow, soothing circles. Silver-blooded wolves were protectors, guardians, blessed by the moon herself with power beyond normal wolves. They were sought after as royal defenders, trusted above all others. The fear came later, when wolves forgot the old ways and began to see anything different as dangerous. Diana felt something ease in her chest, some knot of fear and shame that had been wound tight since she first suspected what her pup carried in its blood. All her life, she had heard silver blood spoken of as a curse, a corruption, a sign of impure breeding. To hear Raven speak of it as a blessing, as something precious and valuable. I want you to help me understand, she said. Everything you know about silver-blooded wolves, what my pup might be capable of, what they might face. I need to know how to protect them. Raven's eyes met hers, warm with approval. I will teach you everything, but not tonight. Tonight, you need rest. Tomorrow we will begin preparing for your brother, for the council's questions, for whatever comes next. He rose, offering his hand to help her from the chair. Diana took it, allowing him to draw her to her feet. For a moment they stood facing each other, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that the mate bond sang between them like a plucked harp string. Stay with me tonight, Raven murmured. Not for Not for anything you're not ready for. Just stay. Let me hold you. Let me keep you safe while you sleep. Diana should have refused. Should have maintained some distance, some protection for her battered heart. But the bond pulled at her, warm and insistent, and she was so tired. Tired of being alone, tired of being afraid, tired of facing every danger without someone at her side. Yes, she whispered, I'll stay. The next 2 days passed in a blur of tension and careful maneuvering. Griffin remained confined to his quarters, but Diana felt his presence like a splinter beneath her skin. Constant, irritating, impossible to ignore. She caught glimpses of him sometimes, watching from windows or doorways, his dark eyes following her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. But she was not alone. Raven remained by her side almost constantly, guiding her through the palace, introducing her to the wolves who would become her allies. Guards bowed as she passed, courtiers offered careful smiles, and slowly, so slowly, Diana began to feel something like belonging taking root in her chest. The nights were different. At night, wrapped in Raven's arms in the darkness of his chambers, Diana felt safe in ways she had not experienced since childhood. He held her with exquisite gentleness, his hands never straying past the bounds of comfort, his lips pressing soft kisses against her hair while she drifted toward sleep. The pup seemed to approve of these arrangements. Whenever Raven was near, the restless kicking subsided, replaced by gentle flutters and contented movement. It was as if her child already recognized the Alpha King as protector, as father, as pack. On the third evening, they sprung the trap. It had been Diana's idea, over Raven's furious objections. Griffin would never attempt anything while she was surrounded by guards. He needed her alone, or at least believing she was alone. So Diana walked through the palace gardens that night with the deliberate calm of a healer administering a cure, breathing in the scent of night-blooming flowers while Raven and his guards watched from positions she had helped choose, every exit covered, every shadow occupied. She sensed movement before she saw it. Her wolf stirred in warning, hackles rising, teeth bared, but before she could cry out, a hand clamped over her mouth and dragged her into the darkness. She would later learn that the guard assigned to Griffin's quarters had been found unconscious, a precise strike to a pressure point rendering him helpless. Griffin's knowledge of healing anatomy had served a darker purpose than intended. Griffin's scent filled her nostrils, familiar and terrifying. His grip was bruisingly tight, one arm locked around her waist while the other kept her silent. Diana thrashed against him, but pregnancy had weakened her, and her brother had always been stronger. "Stop struggling," Griffin hissed in her ear. "You're going to drink what I give you, and then this will all be over. Quick and painless, I promise. More than you deserve." Diana felt something cold and metallic pressed against her lips. A vial, she realized. The same poison he had used on Lunacera, the toxin that had killed innocent pups and nearly destroyed Aluna's chance at motherhood. Horror flooded through her, followed immediately by desperate clarity. She recognized this poison. Of course she did. She was a healer, trained in all the toxic substances that could harm a wolf, and she had recognized it days ago when she first caught its distinctive scent on her brother's clothing. Diana stopped struggling. She felt Griffin's grip loosen slightly, felt his surprise at her sudden compliance, and in that moment of hesitation, she acted. She opened her mouth and swallowed the contents of the vial. Griffin laughed, releasing her. "Finally accepting your fate? I expected more fight from you, little sister." Diana turned to face him, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "You always did underestimate me, Griffin." Her voice was steady, calm. "You forgot that I know poisons better than you do. I know this poison specifically. And I've been taking the counteragent for 3 days." Griffin's face went pale in the moonlight. "What? Did you think I wouldn't recognize it?" Diana stepped backward, putting distance between herself and her brother. The same toxin you used on Lunacera. The same compound you've been carrying since you arrived. I smelled it on you the moment you walked into the council chamber. You're lying. But fear flickered in Griffin's eyes. The counteragent doesn't work once the poison is ingested. Not if you take it afterward. Diana's hand pressed against her belly, where her pup stirred with agitated energy. But if you've been building resistance over several days, preparing your body for what's to come, then the poison becomes nothing more than a mild irritant. Griffin lunged for her, but Diana was already moving. She grabbed his wrist, her healer's knowledge guiding her fingers to the pressure points that would immobilize his arm. He cried out in pain, stumbling backward. "Guards!" Diana's voice rang out across the garden. "Guards, to me!" "You bitch!" Griffin's face twisted with fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're a condemned traitor. I'm an ambassador of peace. They'll believe me." Diana held his gaze without flinching. "Because I have witnesses." From the shadows of the garden, figures emerged, palace guards positioned there by Raven's orders, courtiers who had been following at a discreet distance. And there, moving through the darkness with predatory grace, the Alpha King himself. I heard everything. Raven's voice was death itself, cold and absolute. Your confession, your admission of guilt, your intent to murder your own sister and the pup she carries. Griffin's face went gray. That wasn't... You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Raven moved to Diana's side, his hand settling protectively on her shoulder. You poisoned Lunacera out of jealousy for your sister's gifts. You framed Diana for your crime. And when she escaped justice, you followed her here to finish what you started. She was always the favorite. The words burst from Griffin like poison, years of resentment spilling forth. Everyone loved Diana, trusted Diana, believed in Diana. I trained her. I taught her everything she knows. And how did she repay me? By surpassing me, by making me look like a fool, by stealing my position and my reputation. So you destroyed an innocent Luna's pregnancy. Diana's voice shook with horror. You killed pups who had done nothing to you. I did what was necessary. Griffin's eyes blazed with mad righteousness. I did what needed to be done to put you in your place, and it would have worked if this bastard king hadn't interfered. The words hung in the air, damning and undeniable. Diana felt the weight of her brother's hatred, felt the depth of his jealousy and rage. She had known he resented her. She had never understood how far that resentment could drive him. Raven's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Seize him," he commanded. "Take him to the dungeons. Tomorrow, he faces the full court for his crimes." As the guards dragged Griffin away, still spitting curses and protestations, Diana stood perfectly still, breathing through the adrenaline that left her hands trembling but her spine straight. She would not fall, not tonight. Raven's arms settled around her waist, steadying without lifting. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "Almost." Raven's voice was a low rumble, soothing despite its danger. "Tomorrow we finish this. Tonight, you rest." Diana closed her eyes, letting exhaustion and relief wash over her in equal measure. Her pup stirred contentedly against her belly, sensing the shift in their circumstances. The immediate danger had passed. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation. But tonight, wrapped in her mate's arms, Diana allowed herself to hope. Diana woke to pale dawn light filtering through unfamiliar windows, her body still cradled against Raven's chest. For a moment, she simply breathed, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchor her to the present. The events of the previous night felt distant, dreamlike. Her brother's confession, the poison she had willingly swallowed, the guards dragging Griffin away into the darkness. But it had been real. All of it. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her pup stirred with gentle recognition. The silver in their blood hummed beneath her palm, a quiet pulse of power that no longer frightened her. Whatever her child would become, whatever gifts they would carry, Diana would be there to guide them. She would not let fear shape their destiny. "You're thinking too loudly." Raven's voice rumbled against her ear, rough with sleep but threaded with warmth. "I can feel it through the bond." Diana turned in his arms, meeting eyes that had shifted from black to molten amber in the morning light. The mate bond pulsed between them, a golden thread of connection that grew stronger with every passing hour. She could sense his emotions now, the fierce protectiveness, the barely leashed rage at what her brother had done, the desperate tenderness he tried so hard to hide beneath his fearsome reputation. "Today," she said quietly. "It ends today." Raven's jaw tightened. "The court assembles at midday. Griffin will face judgment before all the lords and ladies of the realm." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. "You don't have to be there. You've already done more than anyone could ask." "I do have to be there." Diana covered his hand with her own. "I need to see it through. I need to watch my brother answer for what he did. To Luna Sarah. To those unborn pups. To me." Her voice caught on the last word. "He was my family. I trusted him, and he would have let me die for his crimes. He would have killed you himself." Raven's voice darkened to a growl. "If you hadn't been clever enough to anticipate his poison, brave enough to swallow it knowing you'd prepared for exactly that moment." "But I did." Diana pressed her forehead to his. "I survived. We survived. And now Griffin will face the consequences of his own choices." They rose together, moving through the morning rituals with a strange intimacy that Diana had never expected to find. Raven insisted on helping her dress, his large hands unexpectedly gentle as they laced her into a gown of deep blue silk. The color of the royal house, she realized, a statement of protection, a claim visible to all who would see her today. Servants brought food that Diana forced herself to eat despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. The counteragent she had taken would continue working for several more days, but she still felt the lingering effects of Griffin's poison, a faint nausea, a tremor in her hands that she hid by keeping them folded in her lap. "The Luna Sarah has asked to attend the trial." One of Raven's advisors appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "She claims her testimony is relevant to the proceedings." Diana's heart clenched. The woman whose pregnancy her brother had destroyed, would she even be able to face that tragedy made manifest? Would Sarah blame Diana for sharing blood with the monster who had killed her pups? But Raven was nodding, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah's testimony could be crucial. If she's well enough to attend, she should be there." "She is recovering well." The advisor hesitated. "In no small part due to the treatments Lady Diana prescribed during her brief time here. Luna Sarah wished me to convey her gratitude." Gratitude. From the woman who had lost everything because of Griffin's jealousy. Diana felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry. Not today. Today required strength. The great hall had been transformed for the trial. Rows of seats lined the walls, filled with nobility from across the 7 territories who had gathered to witness the judgment of a healer accused of treason. At the center of the room, a raised platform held 2 chairs, one for Raven, one for Diana. She had expected to stand among the witnesses. The chair beside the Alpha King sent a different message entirely. "You sit with me." Raven's voice brooked no argument. "You are my mate, recognized or not. You are the one who uncovered Griffin's treachery. You belong at my side." Diana climbed the steps to the platform on legs that felt steadier than they should have. The assembled nobles watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled hostility. She recognized some of them. Lords and ladies from her own pack who had stood silent while she was condemned. Others were strangers, drawn by the scandal of a healer who had risen from accused traitor to the Alpha King's chosen mate. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see what becomes of those who underestimate me. Griffin was brought in chains, his fine ambassador's clothing replaced by the rough gray of a prisoner's garb. His face was pale, his eyes darting around the room with the desperate calculation of a cornered animal. When his gaze found Diana, sitting beside the Alpha King in a gown of royal blue, something ugly twisted his features. "This trial is a farce," Griffin's voice cracked across the hall. "You cannot condemn me on the testimony of a traitor. Diana poisoned Luna Sarah. Everyone knows this. I was simply trying to protect—" Silence. Raven's command cut through Griffin's protestations like a blade. "You will speak when spoken to, and not before." The trial proceeded with brutal efficiency. Witnesses came forward. The guards who had heard Griffin's confession in the moonlit garden, courtiers who had watched from the shadows, palace servants who testified to the private conversations they had overheard. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, constructing an undeniable picture of Griffin's guilt. But it was Luna Sarah's testimony that shattered whatever remained of Griffin's composure. She entered the hall slowly, supported by 2 attendants, her face still bearing the shadows of her long illness. But her voice was clear when she spoke, her eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed her chance at motherhood. "I remember Diana's tonics." Sarah's words filled the silent hall. "They were always prepared with such care. I trusted them completely. But Griffin visited me after every treatment, always checking on me, always so attentive. He would bring me extra doses, adjustments he said Diana had forgotten. I never questioned it. He was the lead healer. I trusted him." Her voice broke. "I trusted him because Diana trained him. I trusted him because healers are meant to protect life, not destroy it." "Luna Sarah," Griffin started, "you killed my children." Sarah's words struck like physical blows. 3 of them. 3 pups who would have been princes and princesses of Thornwood. And you let an innocent woman take the blame for your crime. Griffin's face contorted with rage. They weren't supposed to die. The poison was meant to weaken them, to make Diana look incompetent when she couldn't save them. I didn't know. The confession hung in the air, damning and undeniable. Diana rose from her chair, feeling the weight of every eye in the hall upon her. This was her moment, not as a victim, not as an accused traitor, but as the healer who had seen through her brother's lies. "You trained me, Griffin." Her voice carried clearly through the vast chamber. "You taught me to recognize every poison, every toxin, every substance that could harm our kind. I didn't understand what had happened the night they brought Luna Sarah to the infirmary. I was too panicked, too focused on saving her life. But the Alpha King's alchemists identified the compound, thornroot and moonsbane combined. And when I heard the name, I knew. Because I had watched you develop it. You couldn't have known." Griffin's eyes were wild now. "You weren't even there when I watched you." Diana descended from the platform, moving toward her brother with slow, deliberate steps. "All those late nights in the workshop when you thought I was sleeping. I saw you experimenting with compounds that had no healing purpose. I told myself you were simply curious, simply exploring the boundaries of our craft. I wanted so badly to believe the best of you." The color drained from Griffin's face. "I didn't put it together until it was too late," Diana continued, stopping an arm's length from her brother. "Not until I was already in chains, already condemned. But once the alchemists here confirmed the poison signature, every piece fell into place. Your late nights, your visits to my workspace, your access to Sarah's treatments." Her hand moved to rest on her belly where her pup stirred with restless energy. "But you couldn't stand that I was gifted in ways you weren't. You couldn't bear that people sought me out for healing while they only came to you when I wasn't available. So you found a way to destroy me, and when that meant destroying innocent lives, you didn't hesitate. I deserved better. The words tore from Griffin like a wound finely lanced. I worked harder than you ever did. I spent years building my reputation, earning my place. And you just waltzed in with your natural talent and your sweet smiles and took everything from me. I took nothing. Diana's voice was steady despite the pain in her heart. I only became what I was meant to be, and you couldn't forgive me for that. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Raven's voice cut through the stillness, cold as winter frost. Griffin Valewood of the Thornwood Pack, you have confessed before this court to the murder of Luna Sarah's unborn pups. You have confessed to framing your own sister for your crimes. You have confessed to attempting her murder. The sentence is death. Griffin lunged toward Diana, chains clanging as he fought against his restraints. You bitch! You ruined everything. You and that abomination you carry. Raven moved faster than Diana's eyes could follow. One moment he was on the platform. The next he stood between Diana and her brother, his hand wrapped around Griffin's throat. You will not speak of my mate or my child. Raven's voice had dropped to something barely human, a growl that resonated with pure alpha power. You will die knowing that she survived you, that the pup you called Abomination will be raised as royalty, that your name will be forgotten while hers is remembered with honor. Please. Griffin's voice was a strangled whisper. She's my sister. She was your sister. Diana stepped around Raven, meeting her brother's eyes one final time. She loved you. She trusted you. And you betrayed her in every way that mattered. She turned away. Goodbye, Griffin. Raven's claws extended, gleaming silver in the sunlight that streamed through the high windows. The movement was swift, almost merciful. A single slash across Griffin's throat that ended his life before he could speak another word. The council members exchanged glances but said nothing. The Alpha King's judgment was final, and none dared question it in that moment. Diana watched her brother fall. She waited for grief, for horror, for the crushing weight of loss that should come from witnessing a sibling's death. But all she felt was a strange, hollow peace. The threat was ended. The truth had been spoken. Justice, however brutal, had been served. Raven's hand found the small of her back. Come, this is done. He led her from the great hall, past the staring nobles and the murmuring servants and the guards who bowed their heads as they passed. Diana moved as if in a dream, her hand still pressed to her belly, her mind slowly processing the reality of what had just occurred. Her brother was dead. She was free. And the mate bond pulsed between her and Raven like a second heartbeat, demanding acknowledgement. They ended up in his private chambers. Their chambers now, Diana supposed. The door closed behind them with a soft click, shutting out the world and all its horrors. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stood together, breathing, existing, being present with each other in the aftermath of violence. You were magnificent. Raven's voice was rough, standing before the court, confronting him, speaking the truth without flinching. You were everything a Luna should be. I don't feel magnificent. Diana's voice shook. I feel hollow. He was my brother Raven. I loved him, despite everything. And now he's gone. You can mourn him. Raven's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest. You can grieve the brother he should have been, the family you deserved. I won't think less of you for feeling loss. Diana buried her face against his shirt, breathing in the scent of pine and musk and something uniquely him. The bond hummed between them, a golden thread of connection that demanded more than their current proximity. She could feel his longing, his need, the desperate desire to claim her fully and completely. And she wanted it. Gods help her. After everything that had happened, the only thing she wanted was to belong to him in every way that mattered. Mark me. The words escaped before she could second guess them. Please, Raven. I need. I need to feel like I belong somewhere. Like I'm more than the sister of a murderer, more than an accused traitor, more than. Diana. Raven tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. They burned amber gold, his wolf visible just beneath the surface. You are my mate. You are the mother of my child. You are a healer whose gift saved lives, including your own. If you want my mark, I will give it gladly. But not because you feel worthless, only because you know your worth and choose to share it with me. She stared at him, this fearsome alpha king who spoke of her value with such certainty. The bond between them pulsed with his sincerity, his absolute conviction that she was precious beyond measure. I choose you. Diana's voice steadied. Not because I need saving, not because I have nowhere else to go. I choose you because you saw me, the real me, not the accusations or the rumors or the fear. You protected me when you had no reason to. You believed in me when everyone else condemned me. I choose you, Raven Nightshade, and I want to be yours. The growl that rumbled through his chest was pure alpha possessiveness, primal and raw, and utterly intoxicating. Then I am yours first. Raven tilted his head, baring the strong column of his throat. You mark me, mate. You claim me before I claim you, so that all the realm will know that the Alpha King belongs to his Luna. Diana's wolf surged forward with fierce approval. She rose on her toes, her hands gripping his shoulders for balance, her lips brushing the warm skin of his neck. She could feel his pulse beneath her mouth, racing with anticipation. The scent of him filled her senses, pine and power and something sweeter underneath, something that belonged only to her. Her teeth found the junction of his neck and shoulder, that sacred spot where claim marks were placed. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she bit down. Raven's blood was copper bright on her tongue, hot and vital and singing with alpha power. She felt him shudder beneath her, felt the groan that vibrated through his chest. And then the bond exploded between them like a supernova, flooding her with everything he was. His strength, his vulnerability, his desperate love for her, his fierce protectiveness of the pup she carried. She felt his memories, a childhood of brutal training, a kingdom that demanded perfection, the loneliness of a crown. She felt his hopes, a mate who would stand beside him, children who would fill the silent halls, a future built on love rather than fear. She felt his soul, and it recognized hers with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Diana released him slowly, licking the wound closed as instinct demanded. The mark she had left was already healing into a perfect crescent of silver-pink scar tissue. Her claim, visible for all the world to see. My turn. Raven's voice was wrecked, barely human. His eyes blazed pure gold as he lowered his mouth to her neck, his breath hot against her sensitive skin. Mine. His teeth sank into her flesh, and pain became pleasure in the space between heartbeats. Diana cried out, her body arching against his as the bond completed itself in a rush of golden warmth. She felt him filling the empty spaces inside her, felt herself flowing into the hollow places within him. They were two becoming one, separate souls choosing to intertwine for eternity. Through the bond, she felt their pup, silver and bright and burning with strange power, recognized their new father with a pulse of joyful energy. Raven gasped against her throat, tears sliding down his cheeks. I can feel them. His voice broke. Gods, Diana, I can feel our child. Yours. Diana's fingers tangled in his hair, holding him close. Ours. Forever. Mate. The word was a prayer on his lips as he finally released her, his tongue soothing the mark he had made. Mine. Yours. Ours. They held each other as the bond settled into something permanent, something unbreakable. Diana could feel Raven's heartbeat as clearly as her own, could sense his emotions threading through her consciousness like silver in moonlight. She was no longer alone. She would never be alone again. I love you. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other for days. But I love you, Raven. I love who you are beneath the fear everyone else sees. I love that you saved me when you didn't have to. I love. He silenced her with a kiss, deep and claiming and full of everything he couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for breath, his forehead rested against hers. I loved you from the moment you glared at me across the council chamber. His voice was hoarse with emotion. I loved your defiance. I loved your courage. I loved the way you protected your unborn pup even when you thought you were going to die. His hand spread across her belly, warm and possessive. I love you, Diana Valewood, and I will spend every day of my reign proving myself worthy of you. Diana woke the next morning to find herself still tangled in his arms, the bond humming between them with a settled warmth that was nothing like the sharp, desperate pull of the days before. This was quieter, deeper, the difference between a wildfire and a hearth. She lay still for a long time, listening to his breathing, feeling his heartbeat pulse through the bond as clearly as her own, and let herself understand what it meant to belong somewhere completely. Not as a servant or a prisoner or a burden, but as the other half of something whole. The months that followed passed like a dream Diana had never dared to imagine. Spring melted into summer, and with it came the preparations for her coronation, not just as Raven's mate, but as Luna Queen of all 7 territories. The nobles who had watched her trial with suspicion slowly warmed to her, won over by her healing gifts and her quiet strength. Luna Sarah became her first true friend at court, the two women bonded by tragedy and survival. Sarah's testimony at Griffin's trial had marked a turning point in her own recovery. Speaking the truth had freed her from the prison of her grief. Now she stood as godmother to the pup growing within Diana's womb, the silver-blooded child who would one day inherit a kingdom. She's restless today. Diana pressed a hand to her swollen belly, feeling her daughter kick with unusual vigor. I think she knows something is happening. Sarah smiled, her own belly now gently rounded with new life. A pregnancy that Diana had helped nurture with careful monitoring and gentle healing. Of course she knows. Her mother is about to become the most powerful woman in the realm. The coronation ceremony was held at sunset, when the light turned everything to gold and crimson. Diana knelt before her mate in a gown of pure white silk, the mark on her neck visible for all to see. Raven placed the crown upon her head, a delicate circlet of silver and moonstone that had belonged to his mother. Rise, Luna, Queen, Diana Nightshade. His voice carried across the vast assembly. Rise, and take your place beside me. She rose, and the crowd erupted in cheers. That night, alone in their chambers with the crown set aside and the formal gown replaced by simple linen, Diana stood at the window and watched the celebrations continue in the courtyard below. Fireworks painted the sky in brilliant colors, and music drifted up to her ears like distant dreams. Raven's arms came around her from behind, his hands settling protectively over her belly. Their daughter kicked in response, already recognizing her father's touch. Regrets? He murmured against her ear. Not one. Diana leaned back into his embrace, feeling the bond pulse between them with settled contentment. I was condemned to die for a crime I didn't commit. I was betrayed by my own blood. And somehow, because of you, I found everything I never knew I was looking for. You found yourself. Raven pressed a kiss to the mark on her neck. I simply had the privilege of watching. Diana turned in his arms, cupping his face between her hands. The Alpha King, feared across 7 territories, looked at her with eyes full of wonder and love. We found each other. She kissed him softly. And our daughter will grow up knowing that she is loved, that she is precious, that the silver in her blood is a blessing, not a curse. She will be magnificent. Raven's voice was thick with emotion, just like her mother. Outside, the fireworks reached their crescendo, painting the sky in streams of silver and gold. Inside, Diana Nightshade, healer, survivor, Luna Queen, rested her head against her mate's chest and listened to the double rhythm of their heartbeats. She was home. She was loved. And for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The realm had gained a healer who had become a queen, and in the years to come, they would tell stories of the woman who had survived her brother's treachery, claimed the Alpha King's heart, and raised a silver-blooded princess to be the greatest protector their kingdom had ever known. But those stories were for another time. Tonight, there was only this: two mates, one bond, and the promise of forever stretching out before them like an endless horizon.